Snow fell in soft spirals over Aspen, blanketing the city in white silence. The streets glimmered beneath the Christmas lights, every house glowing warm except one. Inside, a sprawling glass mansion perched on the hill, billionaire Ethan Cole sat alone by a flickering fire, staring at a photograph of his late wife, Grace. He had everything money could buy, and nothing that could fill the empty chair across from him. But that night, something would break through the walls he'd built around his heart. Before dawn, he would meet someone who would change his life forever. It began with a growl, a deep warning sound that echoed through the cold. Ethan glanced up, frowning. Max, his golden retriever, was outside barking furiously near the gate. Ethan muttered under his breath and threw on his coat. But as he stepped into the freezing air, the sight before him stopped him cold. A little girl, no more than 7, was crouched in the snow, tugging at Max's bowl, her small hands shaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was fighting. The dog snarled again, teeth bared, but she didn't flinch. She clung to a scrap of bread like her life depended on it. Her face was pale from the cold, her clothes torn and thin. "Hey, Ethan," shouted, hurrying forward. "Get away from the dog." The girl froze. For a second, fear flickered in her eyes, then defiance. "He started it," she said, her voice small but steady. "I'm just hungry." Max barked again, but Ethan called him off. The animal hesitated, then trotted back toward the porch, still growling low. Ethan crouched down, heart pounding from more than the cold. "What are you doing out here? Where's your family?" She looked at him, her lips trembling. "I don't have one. Not anymore." The wind howled through the trees. Ethan stood there stunned, not knowing what to say. He was used to negotiations, mergers, numbers. Not this. The girl's eyes, large and unblinking, held the kind of pain you didn't see in adults, only in children who'd already seen too much. He tried to soften his tone. "You can't stay out here. You'll freeze to death." "I can take care of myself," she whispered, pulling something from her pocket. It was a small bracelet, handmade, frayed at the edges, with 2 tiny initials stitched in faded thread, GC. Ethan's chest tightened. He reached for it, slowly, his pulse hammering. "Where did you get this?" The girl stepped back, clutching it protectively. "It was my mom's," she said. "She said it came from someone named Grace." The world tilted. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Grace Carter Cole, his wife, had died 5 years earlier in a car crash. The bracelet had vanished that same night. He'd searched everywhere for it, convinced it was gone forever. And now, somehow, it was in the hands of a child, standing in his driveway on Christmas Eve. He stared at her, the snow swirling between them. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said. "Lila James." Ethan's mind raced. Was this a coincidence? Some cruel trick of fate, or something else? Something Grace had left behind that he didn't yet understand? He looked at the small, trembling figure in front of him, the way she tried to stand tall despite the cold. She reminded him of Grace, fierce, kind, and stubborn. "Come inside," he said finally. "You need warmth food, something hot to drink." Lila hesitated. "You're one of them," she said cautiously. "The rich people." Ethan almost laughed, but the sound never came. Maybe he said quietly, "But tonight I'm just someone trying to help." For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly she nodded. He guided her toward the door, Max padding beside them. Inside, the heat hit like a wave. She stood awkwardly near the fireplace, eyes darting around the vast living room. Marble floors, gold-framed photos, shelves of books. To her, it must have felt like another world. Ethan handed her a blanket and watched as she wrapped herself tightly in it, her small frame trembling less. She ate in silence, small bites of soup, as if afraid it might disappear. Every so often, her eyes wandered to a photo of Grace on the mantel. "That's her, isn't it? Lila asked softly. Ethan's throat tightened. Yes, that's Grace. She helped my mom, Lila said, staring at the picture, when we had nowhere to go. Ethan set down his cup, the room spinning slightly. Your mother knew my wife. Lila nodded. She said Grace was an angel. She promised she'd come back for us one day. She looked up at him, eyes wide. Did she send you? Instead, Ethan couldn't speak. He felt the ground shift beneath years of silence and guilt. Grace had been the heart of his world, the one who believed in helping people when he only believed in results. And here was proof that she had kept helping quietly without telling him. He glanced at the bracelet again, its faded thread glinting in the firelight. Maybe she did, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Outside, snow fell heavier, muffling the world in white. Inside, something thawed a feeling Ethan hadn't allowed himself in years. He looked at the girl who'd stumbled into his life and realized he didn't just want to know where she came from. He needed to know why. If you were in Ethan's place alone, wealthy, and suddenly face to face with a child who carries a piece of your past, what would you do? Because the truth waiting for him just beyond this night would shake everything he thought he knew about love loss, and the woman he once believed was gone forever. Ethan Cole hadn't shared his home with another soul in years. Yet now, the quiet rhythm of his mansion was broken by the soft clinking of a spoon against porcelain. Lila sat at the kitchen counter legs, swinging eyes darting from the steaming bowl of soup to the snow falling beyond the glass wall. She looked smaller in the glow of the morning light, like she belonged to another world entirely. Ethan leaned on the counter across from her, trying to make sense of what had happened the night before. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she said, not looking up. "Your dog snores." He couldn't help a faint smile. "You're probably right about that." He paused, unsure how to bridge the silence that followed. "Lila, you said your mom knew my wife, Grace. How did they meet?" Lila hesitated, tracing the rim of her bowl with a finger. "At the shelter, in Denver. My mom worked there before she got sick. Grace used to bring food and blankets. She was nice, the only nice person who ever came back." Her words landed heavy. Ethan felt a sting of guilt settle behind his ribs. He remembered how often Grace had asked him to visit those places with her. He'd always declined, too busy, too tired, too focused on deals that had seemed important at the time. Now, looking at this girl sitting in his kitchen, he realized how much of Grace's world he'd never known. "You said your mom got sick," he said carefully. "Where is she now? I don't know." Her voice cracked for the first time. "She told me to find Grace. Said she'd know what to do." Ethan's chest tightened. Grace had been gone for 5 years. The girl had come searching for a ghost. He stood and walked to the window, running a hand through his hair. "Lila, you can't stay on the streets. We need to find your mother. Maybe the shelter still has records." She flinched at the word "we." "You don't have to help me," she said. "Rich people only help when someone's watching." Ethan turned, startled. "Is that what your mom told you?" She shrugged. "She said people like you don't see kids like me." The truth in her words stung more than he expected. Once it had been easier not to see easier to live behind glass walls and security gates. He'd told himself he couldn't fix the world, that writing checks was enough. But now, confronted by a hungry child clutching his wife's bracelet, he felt the hollowness of that lie. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Marcus Morales," he said when the man answered. "I need a favor. There's a child here who needs medical care and a safe place to stay. Can you come?" Dr. Morales, his oldest friend, arrived an hour later. A kind-eyed man in his 50s, he carried himself with the ease of someone who had seen the best and worst of humanity. He examined Lila gently, speaking to her in a voice that made her shoulders relax. She's undernourished, but otherwise okay, he told Ethan quietly afterward. She needs rest food and some stability. What's her story? Ethan gave him the short version. The bracelet, the shelter, the connection to Grace. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You think she's lying? No, Ethan said, but I think she's holding something back. As if on cue, Lila appeared in the doorway, her expression wary. I can hear you, she said. Marcus smiled softly. Then you already know we're worried about you. I don't need anyone to worry about me, she said, clutching her blanket tighter. I just need to find my mom. Ethan stepped closer. And I told you I'll help. She looked up at him, eyes narrowing. Why, you didn't even know us. My mom said rich men only care when it makes them look good. Her words cut deeper than she could have known. Ethan crouched to meet her eye level. She wasn't wrong about most of them, he admitted. But I cared about your mom's friend. Grace was my wife. If she trusted your family, that's enough for me. Lila's expression softened uncertainty, flickering in her eyes. She studied him for a long moment, then asked quietly, Do you ever miss her? Every day, he wanted to say. Instead, he nodded. More than I can explain. Lila seemed to consider that. Then maybe she sent me, she whispered. Later that evening, after Marcus left, Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by silence. The city lights shimmered below, but his gaze was fixed on the small figure curled up on the couch in the next room, fast asleep under a borrowed quilt. On his desk lay the bracelet, Grace's bracelet, and beside it a framed photo of her smiling in front of a group of children. He remembered the fights they'd had. She'd wanted to start a foundation to help families like Lila's. He'd called it impractical. You can't save everyone, Grace, he'd said once. She'd smiled sadly and replied, Then I'll save the ones I can. Now he saw what she'd meant. His phone buzzed. It was Marcus again. I called an old contact at Child Services, the doctor said. Ethan, you need to be careful. If they find out you're sheltering a child without reporting it, they'll intervene. You could lose her. Ethan rubbed his forehead. She's not some stray I can hand over to the system. She came here for a reason. Then find that reason fast, Marcus said. The law doesn't wait for miracles. After the call, Ethan stood at the doorway, watching Lila sleep. The blanket had slipped from her shoulder. He gently pulled it up again. She stirred, but didn't wake. For the first time in years, his house felt alive, not with laughter, but with something quieter, more fragile purpose. He sat down beside the fire, the bracelet glinting in his hand. The initials GC seemed to pulse in the light. Grace had built bridges while he built empires. She'd believed that love wasn't measured in grand gestures, but in small acts of showing up. Now, as snow fell softly outside, Ethan realized he'd been given a second chance to do the same. In the silence of that vast house, he whispered the words Grace once told him, If you can help, you must. Then he looked toward the sleeping child and made himself a promise he intended to keep no matter what it cost him. The morning sun filtered weakly through the frosted glass painting, pale streaks of gold across the marble floor. Ethan Cole sat at the kitchen table, his coffee long gone cold. Across from him, Lila played absently with a napkin, twisting it between her small fingers. There had been fewer words between them since dawn, though both of them felt the same quiet unease, the kind that came when life shifted under your feet and you didn't yet understand why. Then, as Lila reached into her coat to pull out the tiny bracelet she never let go of, something else fell to the floor. A folded, worn envelope, sealed with a faded red mark. Ethan bent to pick it up. What's this? Lila blinked. I don't know. I've never seen it before. The paper was thin, fragile, with age. Across the front, written in careful script, was his name, Ethan Cole. For a moment, the world seemed to go silent. his name on a letter hidden inside a child's coat. His pulse quickened as he broke the seal with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of stationery covered in handwriting that nearly stole his breath away. He knew that writing. He'd memorized every curve and flourish years ago. It was Grace's. Ethan, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you everything while I was still here. I met a woman named Sarah James at the shelter. She reminded me of us before everything became about meetings and numbers. She had a little girl, Lila. I couldn't stop thinking about them. I wanted to help, but I also wanted to protect them from something I didn't yet understand. Sarah was afraid. I told her if anything ever happened, she should find you. You'd know what to do. Promise me you will. The words blurred as Ethan's eyes stung. He set the letter down carefully, afraid that even his breath might erase the ink. Lila was watching him wide-eyed, unsure if she had done something wrong. "Where did you get this coat?" he asked quietly. "It was my mom's," she said. "She said it used to belong to a friend who helped her. She never said who." Ethan exhaled shakily. The pieces were beginning to align: Grace, Sarah, the shelter, the bracelet. Grace had known this child's family. She had been helping them behind his back, perhaps even hiding something to protect them. He stood and paced toward the window letter still clutched in his hand. "Your mother, she knew my wife." Lila tilted her head. "Grace." "Yes," Ethan said softly. "Grace." Lila was silent for a long time, her small brow furrowed. "My mom said someone helped her once, someone who gave her hope when nobody else did. But then things got bad. She got scared. She said people were looking for us." The words made the back of Ethan's neck prickle. "Who was looking? I don't know," Lila said. "She just said not to talk to anyone who asked about Grandma Ruth or the money." "Grandma Ruth," Ethan repeated, confused. "She wasn't really my grandma," Lila said, fidgeting. "She worked at the shelter too, but Mom said she kept the books. She knew too much." Ethan's instincts sharpened. He had spent decades reading contracts, discovering loopholes, uncovering lies. He recognized the cadence of danger when he heard it. "Lila," he said carefully, "do you still have anything of your mom's papers notes?" Lila shook her head, then paused. "Maybe—" She reached for her small backpack and pulled out a crumpled children's storybook. Inside, tucked between the pages, was another folded paper. Ethan opened it slowly. It wasn't a letter, it was an invoice. A transfer record from a charitable foundation Grace had once funded, redirected to an organization he didn't recognize. The name leapt out like a blade in the light. The Haverly Trust. Ethan's heart dropped. That was one of his own subsidiaries, a company that existed only on paper, used years ago for tax shielding. But Grace had no reason to know about it, unless someone had used her charity to launder money. He sank into the chair, gripping the paper. "Your mother must have found this," he murmured. "She was in danger because of it." Lila looked up at him. "Does that mean she's still in danger?" Ethan hesitated. He wanted to tell her no, to promise that everything would be all right. But the truth was heavier than that. It means she found something she wasn't supposed to. And now, it's my job to find out what it was. For the rest of the day, Ethan worked like a man possessed. He pulled files from his office, connected old accounts, and dug through digital archives that hadn't been touched in years. Every path led to the same place, a shadow network of donations, foundations, and untraceable cash. All tied to one man, Richard Hale, his former business partner. Grace had once warned him about Hale's ruthlessness, how he blurred the lines between charity and exploitation. Ethan hadn't wanted to believe her. Now he saw the truth. That night, as the fire burned low, he found Lila asleep on the couch, her head resting on Max's golden fur. She looked peaceful in a way that twisted his heart. He held Grace's letter in one hand, Sarah's in the other, and felt the weight of two promises pressing on his soul. He carried the papers into his study and opened the small safe behind the bookshelf. Inside were photographs of Grace, a few legal documents, and one more letter still sealed, addressed to E.C. It had been found among Grace's things after the accident, and he'd never been able to bring himself to read it. Now, trembling, he broke the seal. "My love, it began. If you ever find this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. There are things I saw things done in your name, Ethan. I don't believe you knew, but others did. I tried to make it right. I tried to protect them. If anything happens, promise me you'll finish it. Not for me, for the girl." He stared at the final word, the girl. Grace had known about Lila. She had been protecting her long before he even knew she existed. Ethan pressed a hand over his eyes, his heart breaking open in silence. Grace's final act hadn't been about charity. It had been about conscience. She had died trying to shield a child from the corruption of his own empire. When he finally rose, his decision was made. He placed both letters, the one from Grace and the one from Sarah, into an envelope and sealed it tight. He would find out what had happened to Sarah James. He would expose Richard Hale and the men who had turned goodwill into greed. And most of all, he would keep Grace's promise. As he stepped quietly into the living room, Lila stirred but didn't wake. Ethan pulled a blanket over her shoulders and whispered into the dim light, "You're safe here, Lila. I swear to you, you'll never have to run again." Outside, snow began to fall once more, covering the world in white silence. But this time it wasn't emptiness Ethan felt. It was resolve, the kind born not of wealth or power, but of love reclaimed from loss. Grace had left him a mystery, but she had also left him a mission. And before the winter was over, he intended to see it through. The wind had turned sharp again, whispering through the pines outside the estate. Inside, Ethan Cole stood in his study, the fire casting long shadows over the walls. Papers covered his desk, bank records, transfer receipts, and two letters that now seemed to define everything he thought he knew about his life. He had spent the night piecing together the fragments of Grace's hidden work, tracing the thread that connected her charity, Sarah James, and the foundation Hale had corrupted. The truth was darker than he expected. His wife had uncovered evidence that Richard Hale's Haverly Trust wasn't funding shelters, it was draining them. The money meant for food and housing had been funneled into offshore accounts, and when Sarah found out she'd been silenced, Grace had tried to protect her, and somehow it had cost both of them everything. As the realization sank in, Ethan's phone vibrated on the table. He answered, already braced for bad news. Ethan said, "Doctor, Marcus Morales," his voice tight. "I made a few calls like you asked. Sarah James's death wasn't reported as natural. It was ruled undetermined, and there's no record of where Lila was placed afterward. That means someone tampered with the file." Ethan gripped the edge of the desk. "Hale," he muttered. "He's still cleaning up." "Listen to me," Marcus said. "If you go public with this, you're not just exposing him. You're taking on every man who profited from those foundations. You'll be risking more than your money." Ethan's gaze flicked to the living room, where Lila sat on the floor with Max, drawing quietly with one of Grace's old pencils. Her presence had changed the house. The silence that once echoed through the halls now felt alive. "She's already lost everything," once Ethan said quietly. "I won't let them take anything else from her." Marcus hesitated. "Then be ready. Because once you make your move, they'll come for you too." That warning came sooner than either of them expected. Just after sunset, Ethan stepped out to fetch firewood when he noticed tire tracks on the drive, fresh too close to the house. He scanned the darkened road, a familiar unease settling in his gut. As he turned back toward the door, the intercom buzzed sharply. "Mr. Cole," a voice said, low and calm, "we should talk." He froze. The voice belonged to Richard Hale. "How did you get this frequency?" Ethan asked, his tone cold. "You're not hard to find," Hale said. "Old friends rarely are. I hear you've been digging through some dusty files that should have stayed buried." "I'm cleaning up your mess," Ethan said. "The money, the shelters, the children. You turned something good into a machine for greed." Hale laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You think I did this alone. You think Grace didn't know. She helped build the system. Ethan, she was one of us until she got sentimental." The words hit him like a blow. "You're lying." "Am I?" Hale's tone darkened. "You loved her, but you didn't know her. That's what makes this so poetic. She died trying to fix what she helped create. You want to be her savior, fine. But remember, people disappear for less than what you've found." The line went dead. Ethan stood still, the silence roaring in his ears. Grace had always protected her work, but could she have unknowingly been part of something corrupt before trying to undo it? He wanted to dismiss the thought, but the evidence was there, tangled and painful. He turned as Lila appeared in the doorway, holding the drawing she'd been working on. "You're upset," she said softly. "Was it the bad man?" Ethan forced a breath. "It was someone I used to trust." She nodded, as if she understood far more than a child should. Grandma Grace trusted people too. Sometimes it hurt. Her words struck him deeper than Hale's threats. He crouched down, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here, Lila, I promise." That night he couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made him tense. Near midnight, the security lights flicked on. He grabbed his coat and hurried to the window. At the edge of the property, a car sat idling, no headlights, no plates. A man stepped out, looked toward the house, and then drove away. Ethan stood there long after the taillights vanished, his jaw set. They were watching. The threats weren't idle, but he wasn't the same man who once hid behind money and silence. Grace had died trying to do what was right, and Lila's mother had trusted him to finish what she started. By morning, he was already on the phone with Marcus and Beverly, Marks Grace's old attorney. "We release everything Ethan said. The letters, the financial records, the proof. Every document Grace left behind. If Hale thinks fear will stop me, he's mistaken." Beverly's voice was wary. "You understand what you're doing, Ethan. You'll be dismantling your own foundation. The press will come for you too. Then let them," he said. "At least they'll finally see what she died for." After the call, he walked into the kitchen where Lila sat eating toast with jam. She smiled up at him, unaware of the war he was about to start. "Max likes strawberry," she said, holding out a piece for the dog. Ethan smiled faintly. Then, it's his lucky day. But as he poured his coffee, he caught sight of movement outside the window, a figure near the gate just standing watching. He went still. Lila followed his gaze, her small hand clutching the table edge. "Is it them?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Go upstairs, Lila. Close the door." She obeyed without question. When she was gone, Ethan turned back to the window, his reflection faint against the glass. He wasn't afraid, not anymore. If Richard Hale wanted a war, he'd have one. But this time, Ethan Cole wasn't fighting for profit or reputation. He was fighting for a promise, a child and a woman whose faith had outlived her own life. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. The storm was coming, but he was ready for it. The sun rose gently over Aspen on Christmas morning, gilding the snow-covered peaks in gold. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole's house was filled with sound, not the cold hum of silence, but laughter. It came from the kitchen where Lila was standing on a stool stirring pancake batter with all the concentration of a surgeon. Max sat beside her tail, sweeping the floor like a metronome. Ethan stood in the doorway, a quiet smile softening the lines that had etched his face through years of solitude. He hadn't slept much. The night before had changed everything. The documents he and his attorney released had spread like wildfire. Overnight, the world learned what Grace Cole had tried to expose before her death, the corruption that had rotted through the heart of coal industries. The evidence was undeniable: records, letters, transfers, all showing that Richard Hale and his network had diverted millions meant for families like Lila's. The media painted Ethan as both whistleblower and penitent man, a billionaire unmasking his own empire. But none of that mattered to him. All he cared about was that Grace's name was finally clean. By mid-morning, reporters gathered at the gates and cameras buzzed from the air. Inside, Ethan prepared to face them. Lila clung to the hem of his coat as he adjusted his tie. "Do you have to go out there?" she asked softly. He crouched down. "I do," he said, "but not for me. For Grace. For your mom, for everyone they tried to silence." Lila's eyes glistened. "You promise you'll come back?" He smiled. "You couldn't get rid of me if you tried." When he stepped outside, the cold hit like a wall, but the sunlight was blinding and pure. Reporters shouted questions, microphones flashing. Ethan raised a hand for quiet. His voice when he spoke was calm, but carried the gravity of a man who had learned the difference between success and meaning. "5 years ago, I lost my wife, Grace," he began. "She believed wealth meant responsibility, not privilege. I didn't understand that then. I do now. The money we made was supposed to change lives. Instead, it was used to destroy them. Today, I stand here to say that ends now." He paused, scanning the sea of cameras. "I've donated my shares of coal industries to the newly formed Grace Carter Foundation, dedicated to restoring the shelters and rebuilding what greed took away. Every dollar will go to the families Grace once fought for. This isn't charity, it's justice." The crowd erupted in questions, flashes exploding like fireworks. Ethan turned and walked back toward the house, feeling the first true weight of peace he'd carried in years. Inside, Marcus Morales waited by the fireplace, coat still dusted with snow. "You did it?" he said quietly. "The board's resigning? The feds are moving in on Hale? Grace would be proud." Ethan exhaled. "She's the one who did it. I just followed her lead." Marcus nodded toward the staircase. "There's someone else who will want to hear the good news." Ethan looked up. At the top of the stairs, Lila stood frozen in disbelief, her eyes wide and shining. But it wasn't Ethan's speech that left her breathless. Behind her, leaning weakly on the railing, was a woman, pale, trembling, but alive. "Mom," Lila's voice cracked on the word. Sarah James took a careful step forward, her eyes filling with tears. "Hi, baby," she whispered. The moment shattered the air. Lila ran, arms flung wide, and Sarah fell to her knees, clutching her daughter to her chest. Ethan stood motionless, his throat thick, his eyes burning. Marcus stepped forward, explaining softly. "She was found last night. A shelter in Boulder had taken her in months ago. The hospital contacted me after they saw the story break." Sarah looked up at Ethan. "I thought you'd never find us," she said, her voice weak but steady. "I almost didn't," he said, smiling through the ache. "But Grace wouldn't let me stop." For a long moment, the three of them stayed that way. Ethan, the girl, and the woman his wife had tried to save, all bound by loss redemption and the strange mercy of fate. Later, as afternoon light filled the house, Ethan walked through the quiet halls, stopping in front of Grace's portrait. Lila had hung her mother's bracelet beside it on a silver ribbon right beneath the Christmas wreath. He reached up and touched the initials EGC, the symbol of the woman who had led him home even in death. Lila appeared beside him holding a drawing. "It's us," she said proudly. "You, me, Mom, and Max, and Grace." Ethan took the paper, studying the stick figures beneath the crayon blue sky. Grace was drawn with angel wings. "She'd like this," he said softly. "She's still watching, right? Always," Ethan said. As evening settled, the three of them gathered around the table, Sarah still frail but smiling, Lila chattering about pancakes and snow angels, Ethan listening quietly. The house that had once been a mausoleum now pulsed with life. Outside, neighbors had placed candles along the street in tribute to Grace, their glow flickering like stars fallen to earth. When dinner was done, Lila insisted on one last thing. She ran to the Christmas tree and reached up, hanging her final ornament. It was the bracelet, now looped around a silver branch, catching the firelight like gold. "It's for Grace," she said. Ethan swallowed hard. She'd be honored. For a long time, none of them spoke. Snow fell softly beyond the window, and the fire crackled low. Then Lila whispered Merry Christmas. Ethan looked at the little girl who had broken through years of regret, and at the woman whose life Grace had died trying to save. He felt Grace's presence everywhere in the warmth, the laughter, the forgiveness that filled the room. "Merry Christmas," he said quietly, "to all of us." That night, when the lights dimmed and the house finally slept, Ethan stepped outside one last time. The sky was clear, the stars sharp as diamonds. He thought of Grace, her voice, her courage, her belief that love wasn't about grand gestures but the small, steady ones that changed lives. He whispered into the cold air, "You were right, Grace. Love was never meant to be earned. It was meant to be given." And with that, Ethan Cole, the man who once measured worth in numbers, finally understood what it meant to be rich. Ethan Cole's story wasn't about wealth loss or even redemption. It was about awakening. For years, he'd lived in a mansion of silence, surrounded by everything except meaning. The death of his wife Grace had buried more than a marriage. It had buried his belief that love could change the world. But one snowy Christmas night, a hungry little girl appeared at his gate and cracked open the walls around his heart. That single encounter forced him to face the truth about his past, his company, and himself. Through Lila, Ethan rediscovered the humanity he had long forgotten. Her courage, innocence, and fierce will to survive mirrored the compassion Grace had always lived by. Piece by piece, the puzzle of Grace's final days revealed not a tragedy of betrayal, but a legacy of quiet heroism. Grace had sacrificed her safety to protect those who could not protect themselves. And in doing so, she left behind not just a mystery, but a mission. Ethan's journey from indifference to purpose reminds us that redemption rarely comes in grand gestures. It comes in moments of choice, the decision to act when it's easier to look away, to give when it's safer to hold on, to believe when hope feels foolish. His wealth didn't save him. His compassion did. The man who once defined himself by power learned that true strength lies in empathy and true success in service. By restoring Grace's name and rebuilding the shelters she dreamed of, Ethan honored not only her memory, but the countless lives touched by her kindness. Lila found her mother again, and together they built a new kind of family, one not formed by blood, but by love and second chances. And for the first time in years, Ethan looked at Christmas not as a season of gifts, but as a reminder of grace itself, the quiet miracle of hearts finding their way home. The message of this story is simple yet profound. No matter how far we've drifted, it's never too late to begin again. Compassion has the power to mend what money cannot, and even the smallest act of kindness can ripple through generations. In a world that often measures worth in numbers, Ethan Cole's journey reminds us that The greatest investment we can ever make is in people. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the Graces, the Lilas, and the Ethans around you, the ones who remind us what love in action truly looks like. And if you believe in stories that inspire change, subscribe to this channel. Share this video and help us keep telling the kind of stories that remind the world kindness still matters.